welcome back, everybody, to Hold My Jacket on the 27th of June. Now, Norrie, you and I have got quite a lot to discuss this morning, don't we?
Well,
But
we do.
what do you think is the top of the agenda this morning?
I think it's Craig Murray, just because of the mailbag we got, and there's also other correspondence I wouldn't mind just sharing out with you, Gordon, to get your opinion and stuff. If we kick off with that, because David Johnson and Tam McNeish are saying there's a big difference between Liberation.Scot and Salvo and what they do. David Johnson saying, I think you'll find that Salvo is the campaigning group and Liberation.Scot is the official movement for recognition at the UN. Tam McNeish gets a bit confused because he says the difference between Liberation and Scotland, well, there isn't a Liberation, it's Liberate Scotland and Liberation.Scot. We're talking about those two things. So when you bring in Liberation Scotland, that's nothing. There's no group called that. So anyone can get confused, even when you're doing this live, Gordon. We can get words mixed up and come across easy peasy. DJ Marty, he said there are many on the side of independence at Murrayfield who I talk to at the pubs or in the ground. People are more in the know than the SNP care to look into. Scott Tate, he's got in touch. He says totally agree regarding rugby. There are many indie people who support Scottish rugby. You were saying that they were all public school and all that kind of stuff. That's not the case.
But yeah, okay, I accept that. I'm happy to be corrected there, Norrie. By the way, that reminds me of something which happened to me yesterday. I happened to be just in a McDonald's and I was standing in the queue and somebody recognised me and this gentleman started to talk to me and he was talking about the fact that he's a Rangers fan but also a yes voter, and he said he was amazed at how many more Rangers fans there were who pro-independence than he thought. But he said he was really astounded at the fact that there were a number of Celtic fans who are against independence, and he found that absolutely hard to imagine why they would feel that way. But I think that just goes to show you how it crosses boundaries, though. We always, I think people assume that if you're a Rangers fan, you're anti-independence. He says, no, so definitely not. So that was an interesting little conversation that happened to me yesterday. That just reminds me of how fluid things can be.
I get that all the time, Gordon, especially when I was doing the radio stuff. You get doing the sports show. A lot of Celtic fans are indie. Let's not discount that. And a lot of Rangers are indie. It's a fact, but we overlook it and we think it's a divide and rule tactic. And they've not got a saltire on either side. They've got a tricolour and they've got a Union flag. Where do Scots fit into those two teams? Very difficult to sugar in there, isn't it? So. It's good to see the tide is turning. Peter Lamont, he used to drive on the HGV down to Fort William, and it was 66 miles of hell from Inverness, he says. Only 3 safe places to overtake slow vehicles. That's if nothing's coming in the other direction, of course. And he's also behind what we said was an idea by Fergus Ewing to link up Fort William to Inverness by a rail track. Viking 2458, he says, Norrie, I heard Craig, Sarah and Alf on an American radio station all getting their point across. So it's not just Craig. He seems to be getting utilised for his diplomatic skills and his vast network of friends in this arena. It's a slow machine that's moving in our favour.
Yes, I think that's a very accurate way of describing how this works. Craig, incidentally, was asked by Roddy McLeod on Through a Scottish Prism how long the process would take to get decolonisation started, and Craig said that his most pessimistic view was 2 to 3 years, which surprised me. That's a lot shorter than most of us imagined, because that was if it went badly, that if it took a long time. So it's not as long a process as people think.
No, it's not.
That was an interesting takeaway from that.
Well, we'll talk about Craig Murray in a minute, Gordon. Alan Crowe says, I get the impression Norrie doesn't like Craig Murray. having disparaged them twice. So let's put the facts as we see them, Gordon, on the table. Craig Murray is doing a job for Scotland. You cannot deny that. He's got more skills than I have and you have. He's a worldly wise character, and he's going across there. The problem I see is he doesn't have a job. He doesn't represent the British government anymore. Scottish government don't have any laws and any requisite to use a diplomat because of the setup. So he's there on his own. And this is where I think it might get difficult for him. But I don't know the ins and outs of diplomacy, Gordon. I don't know how he's going to work this. I'll be as shocked as anyone if we get it in 3 years. But I am fingers crossed that this guy can do something magical for Scotland.
Couple of things about Craig Murray. Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, he's retired. But look at it this way. He wouldn't be able to do what he is now doing if he wasn't retired, because he has he's got no horse in the race anymore. He's not working for the British government anymore. He's not a public official, and he doesn't have a mandate from either the British or the Scottish governments to do what he's doing. So basically, he's volunteering to be an unofficial envoy who's using his contacts at the UN to smooth the pathway for the decolonisation application, which, as we both know, Salvo and Liberation.Scot have provided the information for. So he's not there to officiate in his capacity as an ambassador. He's just using his contacts and laying the groundwork, introducing all of these other diplomats to the idea that Scotland actually wants to be decolonised, and that a process which is about to be set in train to do that, and trying to garner support from as many of these other UN member states as he can. And Roddy's programme the other day through a Scottish Prism, anybody who wants to, please go and watch that. It's a long interview with Craig Murray. The process is laid out in a lot more detail there, I think, than has been the case in the past. We've always, it's always been a bit shrouded in mystery about how this works. And I think we're beginning to see now how it might work and how it will enable our Scottish politicians eventually to give us a vote on this. But once the colonisation process begins, it can't be stopped. That's an important factor.
Once that juggernaut starts moving, it's going to be difficult to put the brakes on it. And I tell you what, the UK is in a precarious position all over the globe. They are not liked, and that could help Scotland. And Scotland is fighting. We're the underdog in this, and people like an underdog. And they know Scotland. People around the world, and I hate to say it, Gordon, but our tartan and our kilts and all that actually help us in this, because it just brings something to the mind of somebody foreign and going, oh yes, I remember. Yeah, okay, Scotland are a country. Forgotten about them because they're not in the UN. We never talk about them. But we never talk about them in the European Union unless it's brought up. But we don't get the status as Ireland gets, for example. So I think we've got really, really good grounds to move forward in this. The one thing I thought Roddy excelled at in his programme, if you haven't seen it, it's through a Scottish Prism. And Roddy was asking Craig who it was, this country that's going to stand up. But Craig couldn't give any inkling in that. The only clue we got was that he'd already mentioned them before. And I thought, is this Serbia? Is this Serbia? And if it is, Roddy says the Tartan army will be over there en masse. We'll all be going to holiday in that country and show them that we... And do you know what, Gordon? That's what happens. It's not political parties that win you independence. It's people. So when you go on holiday somewhere to this country that's doing you a favour, they're recognising that. And then the bonds get thicker and stronger. And before you know it, we only need one country. And it could be whoever it is. Not saying yet. I'm just assuming it could be Serbia because you mentioned them. But I don't know. But if it is that country, well, we're best buddies with them, aren't we?
Well, that's the thing, and it actually doesn't matter which UN member it is at all, or what the name of the country is, as long as you have just
Yeah,
one who are
yeah.
prepared to sponsor your application for decolonisation. That's enough. But what I find interesting about this, and I hear a lot of people saying, but the United Kingdom is on the Security Council and they have a veto at the UN. They can't use their veto in a decolonisation application because it's a completely separate issue and a different committee, and it's not covered under the veto.
Yes, exactly. So we're covered
So,
there.
yeah, we are. At least from an international legal point of view, yeah, we are. And once decolonisation begins, it cannot be stopped by
Mm,
the coloniser, in other words, in this case, the English government. So once it begins, they won't be able to put the brakes on it. It's not just a juggernaut, it's difficult to stop. It can't be stopped once it
mhm,
starts. The
mhm,
process has to see its way all the way through to the end, however long that takes. Craig
mhm,
Murray has said on Roddy's programme, and this surprised me actually, and surprised a lot of people, that the timescale for the decolonisation application isn't 10 years. Craig reckoned that a maximum of 3 years, and that was him being not optimistic, being pessimistic, being very conservative, that it would
mhm.
be less than 3 years.
Yeah.
And that surprised me, and I honestly assumed it would take a lot longer than that.
The other thing that's important in all this, Gordon, is the election next year. We have to show, in a civic sense and a political sense, that we want independence. And that means we have to start voting for independence parties, all of us. And sometimes we'll have to hold our nose because we don't like the colour of this. But as long as they're independence, most of the parties, not the leadership, are pro-independence. And we get them in that parliament. And then we prove to the UN that this is who we vote for, but yet still we're under the cosh. So this place is full of independence parliamentarians, and we still haven't got it. That rushes through the importance of this colonisation bid at the UN, because then they'll say, well, these guys can't go on like this any longer. Come on, let's step in. 2, 3 years? I would say 2 years. Being very, very hopeful.
I suspect, Norrie, that you've actually just said something which I think is very important, which is that um, you need to demonstrate that you're voting for pro-independence parties, even if they're unable to come up with a viable way of achieving it. The fact that they're there and
Mhm.
you have a pro-independence majority or even a pro-independence government in Scotland again shows that the consistency of people's feelings. It's not dropped away, it's increased. What we want is a bigger majority at Holyrood to keep demonstrating that to the UN, to say, look, there is a huge groundswell. Look at the the way people have voted in this general election in 2026. As you say,
Mhm.
proves it. It proves the desire is there, backs it up with evidence.
But if we don't, Gordon, if we don't vote, and apathy gets in because we're getting confused about who's on the list and who's in the constituency, and there's spats all over the place, all you have to do is hold your nose and vote for two independence parties in the list. And I would argue that the SNP 1 and 2 thing is a busted flush. Don't do that. It's just not going to happen. The haunt doesn't work that way. We've seen it. It's been proven. If we get the SNP in the first and there's a hefty, the list seats must come under other parties. It's the
Yeah.
only way you'll get representation. And then that squeezes out the unionist vote, the reform vote at the other side. And you've got a parliament with Colette Walker, Eva Comrie, you've got John Hannah, you've got all these people who are fighters. Can you imagine? And it might be the case, Gordon, that the SNP cannot then sit on their devolution seats. They'll be dragged kicking and screaming with the rest of them to pull them through, with the UN on one side, with the list seats members on that side, and probably half the SNP will be thinking, it's time for a change, it's time for a move. We can't sit here talking about hospital targets and all that kind of stuff. There's a bigger fight to be won. And I think the dynamics will change. So we have to vote for it and we have to get it in place. Once we do that, that's parts of the jigsaw taking place. But anyone watching this, has got to do their part. Speak to people, inform people that Liberate Scotland, Alba, the Greens, anyone you can think of that are independence-minded on the list, that's your vote. That's your vote.
I think you and I are often accused of bashing the SNP, but here I want to make a statement that what you're saying is correct. The SNP is the biggest pro-independence party that we have. It is far more likely to win government because they provide candidates in the first vote. That's the constituency seats. And so, despite the fact that I criticise the SNP a lot, it makes sense to vote for them in the first vote. And as you say, not to vote for them in the second, because that is going to dilute the pro-independence nature of the government we elect. We need pro-independence parties from the list who are not the SNP as a second vote in order to bolster them and to bolster the strength of that pro-independence majority in Holyrood and to increase it. One of the things we've done, I think, or we've all been guilty of doing, is basically succumbing to apathy and not turning up to vote. And that's what happened in the last by-election. This is why the Labour Party motivated its voters to get out and vote, whereas pro-independence voters basically sat back and thought, what's the point? Which, okay, might be all right in a single constituency seat, but when it comes to a national election, as is coming up in 2026, we need to think a lot more strategically than that. And that means perhaps SNP1 and pro-independence too. We've been saying it for years that SNP1 and 2 makes it worse. It allows more unionists in the list seats, and we have to make sure that doesn't happen this time.
But equally, Gordon, the SNP vote has gone right down. It's something sitting at 33, 34%. That means to get independence, you need another 20-odd percent. And if it can't come from SNP supporters who aren't voting for the party for whatever reason, and we just heard not so long yesterday, in fact, that John Swinney has not ruled out a coalition with Labour. He says it'll be a parliament of minorities. And he was asked would he go into a coalition, and he ignored it. He didn't go on to it. What we're wanting to hear from John Swinney is not in any circumstance do you go in with a unionist party in this parliament. That's what we want him to say. But saying nothing, Gordon, is giving us the heebie-jeebies. And this mantra, we'll have to work with the British government more and more. You're wanting to stand up on your own 2 feet, John, and get your SNP team looking towards independence. Never mind diversion all over the place with reform and, talking in that absolute pantomime that is the Scottish Parliament right now. It's not a parliament worth talking about. And there he is thinking he's all grand and great because he's taken on the Tories and he's taken on the Labour Party. Whoopie-doo. There's a bigger fight going on outside that Parliament, and you better switch on to it, because if you don't, either you've got to step down or SNP have got to do something at their conference and get somebody who can get in. Because it's just... On you go, Gordon.
I was just going to say, Norrie, I think there's a number of, probably a minority now, of SNP activists who say things like, well, it worked in 2011 for Alex Salmond voting SNP 1 and 2. Now, it's as if nothing has changed since 2011, but the whole political architecture of Scotland has changed dramatically since the time of Mr. Salmond, and also since the referendum in 2014, it's changed. And it's important that those SNP activists are still saying that. Have a look around them and see how things have changed, because the SNP is going to need all the support of the smaller independence parties when it does get into power. And I'm assuming that it will next year, because many of us will still vote for the SNP in the first vote and then choose a smaller party as a second choice, with the idea of getting people like the ISP, like ALPA and other pro-independence party members in on the list, because it bolsters the majority for independence. The SNP see this, or have seen it traditionally, as their province. They're the only party who can achieve independence for
Yeah.
Scotland. And therefore, they rely on that history to get people out to vote 1 and 2. But even the SNP members themselves are now thinking, well, voting SNP 1 and 2 hasn't worked. It's just allowed more unionists in on the second vote. And so they're beginning to question that and say, well, okay, I'll put my cross in the SNP box in the first vote to make sure we get a constituency seat there. But on the second choice, no, I'm going to choose somebody else because there's a better chance that they are going to fight off the unionists because their vote's not being diluted by the dissent system. And that is the key thing.
Well, we're getting a message. Kevin says SNP 1 and 2 works in areas with low SNP turnout. So it might be best to consider SNP 1 and 2 now because of low turnout. There's a low turnout because of the SNP. People don't want to vote for the SNP anymore, Kevin. And he goes on, the unionists have been playing this card for years. Look at Murdo Fraser, 9+ times on the list. That's why we need to get somebody else on the list. If it's SNP 1 and 2, Murdo gets back in. That's the problem. That's a million votes wasted last time, sorry.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, the reality of the voting system has always been skewed deliberately to prevent a pro-independence majority from occurring. Alex Salmond broke the system in 2011, but nobody is ever going to be allowed to do that again. And nobody is ever going to be allowed to have another independence referendum again, because on both occasions, the British state got a huge fright. They found themselves losing to independence support in Scotland, and that's something they're not going to permit to happen again. And therefore, the SNP 1 vote is probably important for all of us, even if we don't support them anymore, to get a pro-independence, at least nominally pro-independence majority at Holyrood. Not because we are going to get independence next year, but because we're going to need them to be in place for when decolonisation begins to occur. At which point, then free to start campaigning properly to hold a defiant referendum, because at that point you've got the backing of the UN.
Yeah.
And when you've got the backing of these other nations, you don't need to be scared of the colonizer anymore.
No, and for people who are thinking, Gordon, that the ISP only get a handful of votes, the Inde for Inde, never heard of them, they'll only get a handful of votes. This is a different election. I can assure you that they can get in through the back door. The list, it's not a back door, but I shouldn't have said that. The list system. If you think back, Gordon, to when the I can't remember when it was, but the first or the second elections to the Scottish Parliament, you had SSP, you had pensioners for Inde, and you had all kinds of people in there on the list system. They got in because they had enough votes, and you don't need many to get a seat. Annie Wells got something like 2,500, and the Tories in. We're talking about small amounts that can get you into the Parliament. So it has been done before. You vote for it. Just because you don't think it will happen doesn't mean to say it won't happen. And look up Liberate Scotland. Look up the candidates, because I think they're all over the place. Last count, Gordon, Liberate Scotland is a new political alliance formed of ISP, Sovereignty, Inde for Inde, and others. Candidates in both constituencies and all 8 regions. They're there to be voted for. You can't say you haven't been told.
Can we be very specific here, Norrie, that this is Liberate Scotland, which is a campaigning alliance of multiple pro-independence parties. Liberate Scotland. No dot, no liberation. Liberate.
No .com, nothing.
Yeah, we have to make this very plain that is the group of pro-independence parties standing on the list together on the same manifesto.
Yes, exactly, Gordon. It's Liberate Scotland. It's 2 words. Liberate your freedom in the country. There's no dots. There's no anything else. Salvo, nothing like that. Liberate Scotland.
Let's just be clear, because people are becoming more and more confused with liberation, liberate ... and now we've got Liberate Scotland as a campaigning group as well. So it's confusing. I think there's more information needing to come out online so that people understand these things. We can only tell them what we know, and emphasize the differences between these three different names.
Exactly.
But Liberate Scotland is the campaigning group of pro-independence parties standing in the list. I think that's probably the easiest way to identify them.
Yeah. So Liberate Scotland, it's a new political alliance specifically brought together to win as many votes as it can for the next election, which is really, really crucial. Remember, Alba aren't in this new political alliance. They're doing their own thing. If you want to vote for them, make sure that they have a candidate not competing against the Liberate Scotland, because then that waters down the vote again. Make sure they're all over the place. Take it very, very easy when you're voting, and look very carefully who the candidates are in your area. Once you know the candidates, and there'll be a lot of garbage in there as well, the Raven Looney Scottish Party and stuff like that. Ignore that. Focus and laser on to the parties that you now know of who are standing up for one thing and one thing only, Gordon: independence, nothing less. That is their mantra. And for me, that's good enough. That is good enough. The other thing is, while decolonisation case is progressing, Scotland needs to show civic and political will to be independent. A plebiscite election, the UN will oversee if we've got more in. If you don't vote carefully and look at all the options, you might let in a unionist parliament. It's that crucial.
There's Norrie, there's an interesting, when you were talking about a plebiscite election, I think it's important to understand something here. The United Kingdom will never accept the result of a so-called plebiscite election. It's not recognised as a vote for independence. It won't be, no matter how much we might wish it to be so.
No, can I stop you there, Gordon? It might not be at that point, but 3 years down the line, with those people still in the parliament, it's still a bubbling kettle. It hasn't gone off.
What I'm trying to say, Norrie, is that with the UN behind us for decolonisation, we won't need to have a plebiscite election. We will have a referendum specifically on leaving the Union, on ending it, because it has to be clear and binary. It can't be an election, because we know the British state won't accept it. They will just say, haha, it was just an election. It means nothing. And actually, in international legal terms, they'll be right. No matter how much we might hope that it's not. It's a demonstration of support for independence, but it's not official. And it needs to be a self-executing vote. And to do that, you have to have a specific binary referendum, but it has to be observed by the UN, and that needs time. And it's the time taken to get the decolonisation process going that's important here. Yes, we need to have pro-independence parties in place in Holyrood ready to do the job, but they can't.
But Gordon, we're being. You've got to understand as well that if we're voting for something that we call independence, that's the plebiscite. We're an independence party. We're not voting for gender reform. We're not voting for green free ports and nothing like that. You have to say what you're standing for, so people can identify with it. That's all I'm saying. And then you get people saying, a plebiscite for Scottish independence. I'm backing that. Now, you're right, legalities it might not be worth it, but in people's hearts, that's what they want to do. Maybe take the legalities out of this and just think people are wanting this, and they're wanting to do something positive and constructive. And if that means they're voting for a party which resonates with them, let them do it. Let them be a plebiscite party or plebiscite.
Yeah. The only note of caution I'm sounding is that a plebiscite is just a vote. It's just a democratic event. An election is a democratic event to elect individual candidates, and the two can't be conflated because they serve different purposes. If you want to have independence, you need a self-executing referendum, one in which, when the yes vote wins, it results in independence happening and not just a demonstration of intent. It has to be legally self-executing.
But
So
the
it's
thing
very
that's happened first, Gordon, is a election. It's not a referendum. So
no,
let's fight that
it's
battle
still
and get it.
it's still vital that we vote for pro-independence parties of our choice, but I would suggest that they be SNP one and any other independence party on the second vote, because
Yeah,
that's the most likely one to produce the biggest pro-independence majority in Holyrood. And I'll
I was just
guarantee you,
mentioning Alba because Kenny McCaskill, when I interviewed him, says he's standing in a plebiscite for an independent Scotland, and he won't move from that.
well, that is his stated aim, and he will get votes for that, Norrie. But it
Yeah,
won't alter the fact that the plebiscite's not self-executing, so it won't result in independence. It will just result in somebody being elected who wants it. And that's just an unfortunate fact that
yeah,
we can't do that. I don't say that he's wrong. I'm just saying that we have to recognise what it means when we vote for him. So if people vote for Kenny, which is great if they do, and he'll get elected, he's not going to be able to execute independence on the basis of that vote.
no,
It
not at
needs,
that point.
yeah.
Not at that
So
point.
we need to just remember that it's a complicated system. I wish there was an easy answer to this. There just isn't.
No,
It's been made.
but you've got to say what you mean to do, even if it's in the future. And I know I take your point. People might be saying this just to get their seat in the Parliament and then relax because they're on their 80k and they're getting all their perks. But I think in this election, we're really looking, and we really know now that we need independence more than ever. We've got a genocidal prime minister, and we've got a libertarian Labour Party we never thought we'd see. Water's getting taken from us, electricity's taken from us. We're getting inflation going through the roof. It's crucial we get people in there that can turn things around for us.
Yeah, and I think actually just what you just said about what's been taken from us segues us nicely into what I wanted to talk about next, which was Tim Rideout's recent lengthy interview. In fact, it wasn't an
Yeah.
interview. I remember correctly, it was actually a video which Tim made about the urgency of needing a new currency before we vote for independence and the numbers of reasons why he thought that. But in his video, he was emphasising the fact that in Scotland, there are almost no Scottish companies left. All of our natural resources, all the big, so supposedly Scottish companies, Scottish Water, Scottish Gas, all the rest of these so-called Scottish firms are all owned by international investors or foreign corporations. And so we don't have any control, as you rightly point out. We can't control our water supply. It's owned by Scottish Water, which is going to be invested in by somebody else, eventually. At the moment, Scottish Water is publicly owned, but it's operated by a private corporation or private company on behalf of the Scottish government. It's a kind of hybrid, and there is a danger in that. But we have lost control of our national grid. We have no control over our energy corporations or our generating capacity or our gas or oil or anything else. All the things we critically need,
Yeah.
we can't control, including food and also whiskey. He was pointing out that the whiskey corporations, over 68% of them, are foreign owned.
Yep.
Not just owned, but foreign owned. So we don't have control over our national major exports. And that needs to change. So, there's a
Well,
lot of things that would need to be done.
I saw that interview, and Tim Rideout was sitting on his couch just talking to the camera very, very well. I thought wasn't getting asked any questions, just off the top of his head. But one thing he mentioned that I kind of understood, and I remember this from 2014. Alex Salmond was caught up in the currency debate, and at
Yes.
that time I thought, "What are you doing? What are you talking about? Why do you want another country's currency, even for the next 10 years? You need to get your own currency, because if you're at the mercy of the Bank of England, they control your interest rates." So we're thinking,
Yep.
why is he going down this path? And he must have thought that Alistair Darling would have tripped himself up. Whatever the strategy was, it failed. And at that pivotal point in that referendum, we could see the votes tumbling back down again to 45 from 52, 53. It went straight down again. And people were
Well,
talking everywhere about currency. And Tim Rideout just explained everything that we feared at the time. Alex Salmond got it wrong.
He got it wrong because not because I think his initial idea was to keep the pound to steady the ship so that people would still vote for independence, thinking that they're not going to have a problem with their savings and their pensions. The problem with it was that when Alistair Darling on camera said to Alex Salmond, "You can't use the pound, what's your plan B?" Alex never said that we should have our own currency. That's what he should have said, but for some reason he didn't. He just stumbled, and that was exactly the point where it failed.
Yeah,
The currency is vital because you need to have your own central bank and your own currency so that you can control the value of your currency. And it would be, as Tim said, initially pegged at exactly £1 in value, and that would make it absolutely easy for people to vote for independence because they would not be compelled to change to Scottish currency if they didn't want to. They could keep their savings and their pensions in British pounds. Nobody was saying that it was going to be forced on them. And that was another thing that Darling was trying to imply, that you would have the Scottish currency forced on you if there had been the talk of a Scottish currency, but there never was. That was the great shame of how far Alex Salmond got before that happened. And that always mystified me.
Mystified me as well. I tell you this, and at the time and since Commonweal have said, look, you could set up your own currency, run it at the same time as the pound, and give people the choice. You can build your own central bank and take mortgages. And if your mortgage, it seems to be a better deal in the Scottish bank, you'll automatically go there. That's what a human does. It goes for the cheapest, best option. And so after 2 or 3 years, a currency is based on what's behind it. So if you've got oil and you've got tourism and you've got stuff to solidify your currency and it's not going to collapse, you're in a pretty strong position. Actually, Scotland has to be really careful it doesn't get too rich so that it can import and export properly. You need a balance of things to do this.
Yeah,
so there's a lot more in this. And when you look at what Commonweal were saying, you have one option there to go with Scotland if you want. I mean, it's as easy as decimalisation when that came in. You just get new coins and you dealt with it. You know, it's easy. It's not a currency. It's not a big deal, Gordon.
And the other thing is that it doesn't matter what the currency is called, because it would be effectively a Scottish pound. So it would still be a pound. It would just be a Scottish pound, and it would be worth exactly.
I wouldn't call it a pound. I would call it something else.
But the thing is, if you call it a Scottish pound, then people think, okay, it's the same as a pound in England, therefore I'm not worried about it. You can call it something else later if you want. But the idea is that, as you say, as the time goes by after independence, the Scottish currency gets harder and more valuable. The English currency was already devaluing. It has been steadily doing so for about 50 years. And it will go down more, and the difference in value between the Scottish pound and the English pound is going to go like that. The Scottish pound is going to increase in value, and people, as Robin McAlpine said, would naturally want to switch their investments to that because it's going to get a bigger reward for their pensions and their savings. And that's just the natural way of things with money. Yeah. And the other thing that Tim said about the Scottish currency is that once it does that, then the two currencies can start to drift and find their own levels. You know, they can be pegged together initially, and as time goes by, as the Scottish currency begins to want to increase in value, you can let it drift by, say, plus or minus 1%, plus or minus 5%, gradually just let it go to its own level. But you mentioned something about not wanting to become too wealthy, because if you have a lot of oil, you end up awash with American dollars, and American dollars would have an effect on your currency.
That's right.
So you actually need to have a sovereign wealth fund to put the American dollars in, so they're offshore and not affecting the value of your currency. This is why Norway created their sovereign wealth fund. It makes their people wealthier, but it keeps their currency stable. And that is what we would need to do. Most people do not understand currency or finance. Nobody really is an expert on it, but that's the situation. You need sovereign wealth fund to control the value of your own pound or your own Scottish banknotes. So all of that would have to happen. But the biggest takeaway of all from Tim Rideout's lengthy video was the fact that he revealed something which I didn't know. Remember that Alistair Darling said you can't use the pound? And when he said that, I thought he just meant you can't use it as the currency for trade. You know, you can maybe use it for your shopping. But actually, what he meant was that the British state could instruct the Currency Issuing Bank of England to disconnect the electronic banking system to Scottish customers. They could cut you off from any electronic access to your own money in your own British pound banknote derived bank account. And that was something I never realized they could do, but apparently this is true. And that's what the threat was. The threat was you will only be able to get access to your money if you go to your bank physically and withdraw the whole lot and put it into a Scottish denominated account in Scottish pounds. You would not be able to buy or sell anything. You wouldn't be able to use your credit cards. They would cut you off. And that I found absolutely staggering that that was even being contemplated by the British state. But apparently it was.
Oh,
this
yes.
is what Salmond faltered. That was the threat. You know, it's a big threat.
But, you know, a political strategist like Alex Salmond would have countered that with something or other. He would have brought it out into the open if he'd known. But he didn't. And he didn't surround himself by people who did know. And what he should have done as well, I remember asking him when he came to Inverness, I was in a stall, a yes stall, about getting other countries, Denmark, for example, Finland, and maybe getting ambassadors, people coming over, even just ordinary politicians, getting viewpoints from there. And he never done it. And it was left to people like Leslie Riddoch with a camera crew trying to go across to Iceland and all these places. But you know what? If Alex Salmond had done that and got a slot, and bearing in mind, Gordon, town halls were full, village halls were full, everybody was talking about this. We were on a huge crusade with this. That would have got more people in, but he didn't do it. And we often wondered, why didn't he do it? Why?
Well, no, there was a problem with this. Something which I didn't know, which also Tim Rideout revealed, was that Alex Salmond was advised to create a Scottish currency. He was told why it was important, and he was told that that should be the plan B. But for some reason, he never articulated it during that debate with Alistair Darling. And that was the big mystery. Why not? Why did he not say that? Because he knew it, he was told it, he was warned about it, but he had decided, because he was the man who was driving independence campaigning at the time, that we should keep the British pound in the meantime. But for some reason, he never said, when Alistair Darling challenged him, we would create our own Scottish pound, because that would have diffused the whole situation right there and then. It would have ended the debate, but it never happened, and that has always bothered me that happened, because I mean, Salmond is an oil economist. That was his training. He was an oil economist. He knew this. Why did he not say it? I've never been able to.
The thing is, Gordon, as long as we don't make these mistakes again, as long as we have got a backbone and we stand up to this kind of nonsense, it proves a point in this that we've made mistakes and we've come across hurdles and we've come across a Westminster system that we didn't think would act like this. Now we know the real shape of this Westminster system. And we know it now. We'll get on to, maybe if we've got time, we'll talk about the Liberation Front being criminalised. But we're going in a direction that needs strong will, backbones, and courage to take Scotland to the next stage. This is always going to be the most difficult stage when we're right at it. We're there. It's the next hill we've got to get over. And this is where we start getting worried and we start thinking it'll never come, it'll never happen. But if we stay strong, each and every one of us, we can do this. And learn the mistakes Alex Salmond made on the currency. And, you know, look up Commonweal. give them a wee bit of time. If anyone today, just sign up to their post every week. It's full of good stuff, and it shows you how Scotland can be the best it can be. And what they do, Gordon, they take best case scenarios from different countries and adapt them to Scotland. How would they fit in here? Will it be
That,
rail, building, houses, infrastructure, economies, well-being? It's all there. 10 years of study and work. They're amazing
yeah.
people. Amazing.
We have gotten used to things being bad here. We think it's normal that there are potholes in the road. We think it's normal that there are no major roads across the Highlands. We think
Yep.
it's normal that there's no rail route direct. We think it's normal that we have to pay huge, enormous airfares and ferry fares to go anywhere. It's not normal. None of it is normal. We've been basically kept poor all this time. Our infrastructure has been gradually diminished, destroyed, and devalued and underinvested for decades. And this is why, when you do become independent, you have to rebuild your infrastructure because your country hobbled for the last 60 or 70 years by an occupier who'd been stripping it of its resources. And it's as simple as that. So, yeah, we need to be angry about this. We need to be laser focused, and we need to keep our determination, as you said, our courage to keep going.
The other thing, Gordon, that's happening in the world today is something serious, and it affects us, and it could affect you and I, what we talk about. And this is the Liberation Front. This group has gone out in the streets and talked about the horrors of what's happening in Gaza. They are now being criminalised. They are being brought under the criminal. I can't remember, but they're becoming illegal. They're an illegal group now. So you cannot discuss anything what's happening in Gaza because you could end up being in jail for 14 years. This went through the Parliament.
Yeah, they've prescribed an organisation which campaigns for the people of Gaza, but also for Palestine in general. And the idea that joining a campaigning group, it's not a terrorist organisation, a campaigning group on behalf of people who are being oppressed, who are being obliterated by another country, is not wrong. And the British government has very much been captured by the whole pro-Zionist neoliberal Western attitude to Israel. Israel can't do anything wrong, no matter how many thousands of innocent people it kills. That's all right because, the Palestinians are a threat to Israel. But these are civilians. And if you ignore the fact that civilians are being killed while they're just queuing for food, that's what's happening at the moment. That's just plain wrong. You can't say, we're going to give you food, and then as soon as they turn up, shoot them, because that seems to be what's been happening. And people are starving because they're too scared to go and pick the food up. Food has been weaponized now as a weapon of warfare against a population which were already beaten. So the fact that Israel's turned its attention now to Iran is perhaps a good thing in a way, because it's taken the brunt of the attack away from the defenseless people of Gaza, who are unable to do anything about it. Hezbollah has been largely not obliterated, but it's certainly been stopped. It's no longer really a threat to Israel. I think they know that.
The legalities, the embargo in this group to protest in anywhere in the UK, and for that Scotland is still a part of, unfortunately, and maybe another good reason for us to get out of this disunited kingdom. But we could be jailed, Gordon, for speaking like this. I'm not going to stop speaking because freedom of speech is really important. And I think that it's okay for you to talk about Israel in glowing terms and you will not be arrested. You can call somebody like Jeremy Corbyn was called an anti-Semite. But I say, if you call somebody anti-democracy, anti-justice, and it's got Palestine in the name of it, you're done. What is it that this is dangerous territory, because I tell you this, Gordon, you've just mentioned it already. We've got an emotional tie. We see these kids getting rescued from buildings, their lungs clogged up with dust and stew. We see kids getting amputated limbs without an anaesthetic because the hospitals are without. And we've seen these horrors, and we can't normalise them. We can't make them every day. And
No.
if somebody says to me, you cannot speak out against this, I'm sorry, but I've seen it. I've been there. Do you know this, Gordon? I've seen poverty all over the world, and all the time it could have been avoided. I've been to Africa, I've been into Indonesia, I've been all over the place, and I've seen it. And it's the same thing. You cry out and you feel pain for these people who can't eat and drink good, clean water.
Yeah.
Don't try and stop us. If you do, Keir Starmer, your coat is on a sugly peg. It really is. And this is where, you might not like me saying this, Gordon, but this is when we all must come together with the English and the Welsh and everybody and get this out. Get this out of our lives. This draconian stupidity.
The thing is, yeah, prescribing one group like that means they'll prescribe others. Here in Scotland, at least, we can still protest, but even here, there are certain things we can't do. There are certain places that we're not allowed to protest. There's certain actions that we're not allowed to participate in if they cause obstructions or they inconvenience other people. You can still be arrested for doing that.
Yeah.
That really goes against the right to protest, the right to free speech, and the right to protest. And I've always said, if you can't protest, then you've lost your democracy. It's gone. You're living in a totalitarian state. You're not being allowed out to have a march or a protest. And where does it end? As you say, if you go out on independence and you cause a bit of inconvenience for some local motorists, they can now arrest you for that, even though it's nothing to do with what you're marching for. It's a public offence. It's just down to whether the police want to enforce it or not, or whether they're told to enforce it or not.
Well, there are people in jail right now, Gordon, for siding up with Extinction Rebellion on motorways, trying to stop things. They're in jail right now. Ordinary people who were just taking photos, but that was deemed to be too much. They're in the slammer. And you're absolutely bang on. Where will this end? And we don't have to look far. The Internal Market Act, read that and it'll show you that any emergency will be led to the closure of parliaments and the jurisdiction will be taken at a Cobra meeting to discuss what goes on. Gordon, Stormont was closed for how long? How long was it closed for? And it was never reopened. Donkeys. Yeah. They could do that to Holyrood. Why do you think they gave us upturned boats in a crappy wee building made of concrete? It's because they could get rid of it and it wouldn't cost them that much in the end. Do you know what I mean? It's a scandal.
It was also a great big expensive boondoggle that ballooned in price over 10 times the original price estimates because the politicians wanted it bigger and more luxurious for themselves.
It started off at 40 grand, no wonder it went up to 400 grand and all that kind of stuff. That's what we were fed, and we believed it. Now we're worldly wise to all this. We're worldly wise to all this disinformation, and we can make our minds up. And I tell you what, that is what's scaring Westminster now. They realise they've got uneducated people in Scotland. Off the back of 2014, a lot of people have died. The people who voted no. The youngsters are now voting yes. Gove's secret polling, we're now being told it's been leaked. It was 72% for Scottish independence.
I hadn't heard that. Where did you find that?
That's all over the place. Seriously, look up Gove 72%, and you'll find it on the internet. If that is the case, why do you think he was trying to hold it back? Why do you think? That is a big, big number, Gordon. And SNP come out and say it's 50%. Yeah. They say it's 50%.
Craig Murray believes it's nearer 60-something. I think that's probably close to the mark at the moment.
We don't know, Gordon. It's the truth.
Nobody knows. We're not allowed to know
We're
because
not
then
allowed
we'd
to
get
know.
think this is great. We're on the way to independence. They don't want us to think that. Obviously,
Aye,
that the exercise completely.
correct. They don't want us to know, Gordon. That's the end of it. Once we do
By,
know,
yeah. By the way, Norrie, just before we close, we've got about 4 minutes left. We were going to talk a little bit about wind turbines. I know this is a big bugbear for people in the Highlands. So I did a wee bit of research yesterday on how many onshore wind turbines there are in Scotland. I was amazed to discover that there are 7,280 individual land-based turbines in Scotland. Over 7,000 turbines on the land. There's only 280 offshore wind turbines. They're much, much bigger offshore than the onshore ones. The British government has said that they're actually planning to decommission hundreds of Scottish land-based turbines that are surplus to requirements. They've got far too many of them. And they've just seemed to have okayed every turbine application that there's been, to the point where there's 7,000 of them. I mean, it's not that big a country to have
no,
7,000 turbines.
Gordon, when
We're
I flew back from Ireland, when I flew back into Glasgow Airport, the obvious things you see are golf courses, but the most telling thing you see as you're flying down to land is all these amazing fields, banks of wind farms. And I was out for a wander on the hills yesterday, and I got to the top and I looked across to the flatlands, and you know
yeah,
what? They're all there, whizzing round, whizzing round. And here's the thing, Gordon. This is my, and not just my estimation on this. A lot of people here in the Highlands are saying this is the new sheep. It was the sheep that cleared people from their land. And now
yeah.
they're putting these wind farms all over the flatlands and moving people out the way. And if you go up a break and up the back there, I'm pointing there, but you have no idea what I'm pointing to. But if you go up the hills at the back, you'll find people are starting to settle there for cheaper houses, but the cheaper houses mean there's no access to the main roads, there's no access to the shops, the electricity can go down. Even though they've got power up there from these wind farms, it's not going to their houses, it's going somewhere else. And they're
Yeah,
looking
that's
at
it.
these things and they're a blot on the landscape. So the question is, Gordon, will we be losing our people? More and more people are getting moved out of these spaces for wind farms, just like sheep back in the 18th century. I'm
Well,
really worried, Gordon. Really worried.
it, it's the old story. Scotland becomes the engine room of the empire. You happen to live in one of the windiest parts of the country because these mountain ranges and highlands are very windy. So the first thing they'll do is find out where the most wind is, put in an application, and put up machines where the most wind is, because that's where they're going to make their money. And it's easy because it's on land. It's easy to build them there. It's much
Yeah.
harder to build an offshore farm. And to build an offshore farm needs a far, far bigger investment. And that's why we've got so many small machines, thousands of them all over Scotland at the moment. And that will decrease with time because we're way over capacity with wind energy at the moment. We don't need it all. Any
Scotland
surplus
doesn't.
we do make is going south. This is the whole reason why they're still building them, because
That's
England
right.
needs it needs our power, it needs our oil, it needs our gas, it needs all the stuff that we've got. And if we leave, they lose all of that. And this is why Scotland's economy will expand rapidly and why its currency would increase in value, because we've got all the stuff, all the goodies
Yeah.
that are coveted by Westminster. So we're always going to have to fight against that to get it
Well,
back. Most
but
of us.
we're a nation of thinkers and inventors, Gordon. We can do this without harming the countryside and the ecosystems that are here and keep people where they're supposed to be. In
Yes.
flatter lands where you can farm, for example. It's
Yeah.
easier. It's easy to take over a farm these days and eat processed food because you've got wind farms instead. We've got it all
Yeah.
wrong, Gordon, all wrong. But that's why we need independence. And that's why the two of us, need to keep talking about it all the time.
Well, on that note, Norrie, we're going to have to close the show for today. We're, as usual, overrun slightly, but it's been a very interesting show today, and I hope that everybody will like, subscribe, and comment on all our shows, and keep watching, and also keep donating if you can afford it. But that's it for the day. I'll see you again then.
Just one thing before you go, Gordon. It's if you write a comment, we're now going to be looking at the best comments, and we'll mention them the week after when we get a chance.
Yeah, great idea, Norrie. Let's keep doing that. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next Friday at 9:30.
All the best, folks. Cheers, Gordon. Bye now.
Bye for now.
Push my buttons.